First time I went up 1943 on the Alaska Highway. It was in March 1943, and 3 days before I went up to Alaska, why, Dorothy and I got married. And we got married on Wednesday, and on Sunday morning I left bright and early for Alaska. After traveling just about 4 or 5 days, I think it was, on the train, and it was cold, got up into Canada and was following a snow blower and a scraper that cleaned the tracks, and it was quite a long trip, very cold. The temperature was 27 below zero when I stepped off the train at Moose Jaw, Canada, and it was we'd gone through Moose Jaw and Medicine Hat. It was very cold, and we finally arrived in Calgary. When I got to Minneapolis, my luggage had been lost, so I had on a light top coat, a suit, jockey shorts, and a t-shirt. That was my cold weather gear. I had on a pair of very thin socks and not too heavy shoes. Anyhow, I proceeded to go into stores at Calgary, and I bought long underwear, gloves, I bought a sweatshirt, I bought a wool ski cap, and I bought some galoshes for my feet. In fact, I didn't get my luggage for about a week, 10 days later. But on arriving at my destination, when I got off the train at Edmonton, I arrived at
Edmonton, Alberta.
Edmonton, Alberta. The temperature was 27 below zero. Nobody at the station to meet the train. The number that I was told to call was not available. They did not answer. So
you were the only person from Western on the train.
I was the only one from Western on the train. So I got acquainted with a fellow on the train, and he and I, after about an hour, a taxi cab come out there, and we prevailed the taxi driver to take us back to town. We got back to town, started making the rounds of the hotels, and nobody had a room. So after about the 5th or 6th hotel, it said he didn't have any rooms, so I finally said, well, I think I'll just sleep right there in the lobby hotel in a chair. And the guy said, you can't do that. And I said, well, just call the cops in. I said, I'm going to sleep inside where it's warm. So he proceeded to find me a room immediately. But then when I went up the room and got in bed, I found out there was 4 other people in the room. And they were French Canadians that didn't speak English. And they got up before daybreak and started talking French and turned on all the lights. So we had gotten in bed around 4 o'clock in the morning, and by 7 these guys were up. And so by 7 we were up also, and this other fellow and I. So then I went over to the office and got to...
And where was the office located?
Right downtown Edmonton.
Okay.
For the thing. So anyhow, we got over there, and he said, well, have you had your breakfast? And I said, all I want to take it back home. To heck with this place. I'm ready to go home. So he said, well, go and have breakfast. And showed me where to go. So I went and had breakfast and come back. And then he said, well, where's your gear? And I said, well, it's lost. Well, what can we do for you? And I said, well, first thing you do is get me some heavy clothes. Well, we went out to the army place and got my parka and heavy clothes that they were issued for the place. And this was fine, because then I changed into clothes where I kept warm. We hung around Edmonton about 3-4 days and made a trip over to the Mounted Police, the Canadian Royal Mounted Police Station, get my luggage. Well, I couldn't get my luggage because I had guns in it. I couldn't take it up the highway, they said.
What kind of guns did you have in it?
I had a rifle and 2 pistols, 22 and a 25, and and a .22 rifle. And so finally, some fella standing there and said, "You from the States?" And I said, "Yep." "So what state you from?" And I said, "Indiana." He said, "What town?" I said, "Indianapolis." He said, He said, "I got a sister lives on East or North Gray Street. Do you know where that is?" And I said, "Yeah, that's probably 2 miles down towards town from where I live." He said, "What's your problem?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do." He said, "You just take this form, and I'll be sure that the luggage is released, and that you'll get your luggage. You're going up the highway." And I said, "Yeah." And so he said, "Well, when you get your luggage, you write down the numbers, serial numbers of your guns, and send it back to me, and then we'll send you the permit for them." So I proceeded to go out, and it was within about 4 or 5 days while we took off for Dawson Creek. Went up the highway, and we got up there, and we had a...
So the whole thing had to do with the fact that you just didn't have a permit for the guns.
Yeah, that was the reason for confiscating the luggage. But he released it with the promise that I'd send it back. So we got up there, and we were held over from about Saturday. See, I left on Sunday. We got up there on about Thursday.
What was up there, Dawson Creek?
This was the takeoff point, the lower end of the Alaska Highway. But anyhow, we took off and went up to Dawson Creek. Then they held us there until they got a bunch that was going up the road. We got the Greyhound bus. It was an all-wheel drive with chains on all wheels.
Let's see what he's got.
And we started up the highway about 3 or 4 days later.
Okay, now at that time you were just an installer.
Yes, at this time I was just an installer for Western Rectory.
And in that group of 25 people, was there one supervisor, 2 supervisors?
There probably was about 3 or 4 supervisors and about 4 or 5 men per station were going up. So we were headed for 260N on the highway, or Cold River as they called it up there. And it was a station that was being built. We took off on a bus.
What kind of a station?
Telephone repeater station.
Not microwave?
No, not microwave. Telephone, just had a repeater station with had some carrier in it, telephone repeater carriers in it. And we started up the highway in a Greyhound bus, as I said before, with the chains all the way around, all-wheel drive. We came to a going up a mountain with it, and all of a sudden the traction broke loose and the thing started sliding backwards. So the driver would stand up, lock the wheels, sliding backwards, at neighborhood 25, 30 mile an hour backwards, lock the wheels, and then when it slid off to one side or the other, why then he'd release the air, release the brakes, straighten it up, and he finally told everybody to sit down and hang on. He was going to dump it into the side of the mountain backwards, which he did, and it buried the back end of the bus in a snowdrift. And we stopped with a pretty good thud. So there we sat with the front end sticking out of snowdrift, and a 4-wheel drive, high-wheel tractor come along, hooked onto us and pulled us out. Well then, this was fine, and the next mountain we came to, he stopped top of the mountain. He said, this is a pretty steep mountain. He said, you're going to do some sliding going down. Anybody want to walk down it? Fine. He said, you got about a mile to walk, and I'll pick you up down the bottom. Well, everybody but 2 guys, myself and another guy, got off. I rode it. And the guy did a beautiful job of sliding. locking the wheels and sliding and releasing them. We got down at the bottom, waited for everybody to get on. Well, then the next night, we drove all day in a very heavy snowstorm. The next night, in the middle of the night, he flipped the lights on this thing and he yells, "Everybody out, she's sliding backwards and I can't hold her." Well, I had anticipated this just a little bit because I had my parka and all my clothes on, my boots and everything. And I jumped off. I was halfway back in the bus and I was the second person off the bus. The guy in the jump seat on the right beat me. I was the second one off.
Not only did you have all your clothes on, but you were sitting on the edge of the seat ready to go, huh?
Right. But I got off the bus. Some of the guys jumped out there in their shirt sleeves. It was 30-some below zero.
Gee, many Christmas.
So, needless to say, I gave up my gloves and my galoshes to one of the guys and that jumped out in house slippers. And
What'd you have on?
I had a double parka. And I had on Russell bird shooter shoes, insulated boots.
Bird hunting boots?
Mm-hmm. 9-inch hunting boots. And I had galoshes over those, so I gave our galoshes, I gave those to one guy because he had slippers on. And then the outside, the parka was in two layers, the inner and the outer. The alpaca lining on the inside one was real thick, and the outer one was thin, fairly thin. So I gave up my outside one for one of the guys that jumped out in his shirt sleeves. Our gloves were double gloves, and I gave both pairs of those away so that I could stick my hands in my pockets to keep warm. We got back on the bus after he slid the bus back down the hill and back up. We got back on the top of the mountain and we went on again. Well, from then on I didn't sleep much.
And you slept with your boots on.
This was from Monday until Friday morning. We got in, or Saturday morning we got in. Saturday morning we got in the station, and the guy flipped on the lights and he said, "Well, here's Cold River," and it was coal black. No, and I said, "Where is it?" And he said, "You just keep walking right down that path right there and you'll run into it." We walked over there, got over there, walked in, station, held out my hands. It was snowing inside the building. Looked up and there was no roof.
Where'd the bus driver go?
He went on. He had some more up to going up the highway, so he wasn't going to hang around. And so anyhow, we rolled out our sleeping bags and got in them. They were eider-down sleeping bags, which were warm. Went to sleep. This was Saturday morning, probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Went to bed, went to sleep right away because I hadn't slept all week practically. Had just naps in the daytime, cat naps. Woke up Saturday night, had to go to John, went outside the door, did my tinkle and came back. Went back to sleep, slept all day Sunday, woke up Sunday night, sometime late Sunday night, slept for 2 days. Anyhow, in the meantime, also, while I was sleeping there, they had came and put the roof on and I didn't even know it. That's how good I was sleeping. See?
When you say they,
Yeah.
when you say they put the roof on, you mean they shingled it or?
Well, put the sheeting on and
Plywood
shingled it.
sheets?
Yeah, plywood sheets and shingled it. I didn't know it.
What was this place that you stayed in?
It was the repeater station where we had our equipment.
Okay. All right.
So,
Were there any other buildings in this town, or was it a town, or was
well,
it
they
just
had,
this one
they
station?
had construction people had tents around. They had mess hall. It was a building. The Army had the Signal Corps had a mess hall. They had a officers' room. They had a recreation room for the officers. There was a garage for the vehicles, for the repair of the vehicles there. And there probably was 25, 30 tents of Morrison Knudson's construction guys that took care of the working on around the area. They had the bulldozers and were working on the road. And so and they were construction people too that lived in the tents. The tents had a platform about 15 foot square, and then they had a wood burning stove in the center of them, and they heated with wood that they'd cut. That's what we did. Also had a stove. We heated the building.
Is the whole area wooded?
Yes, very heavily wooded with pine trees, and they were cutting them down to make the room for the Alaska Highway, widening it, and doing that so that the had quite a crew of people, and the station was one end we slept in had wooden bunks, and the other end was the equipment room, and then the far away from us was the battery rooms, and then the engine room where our automatic engines would fire up. We were at this station for quite a long time, approximately 3 months, and during this time, why we had to melt snow to make our distilled water for our battery. Then we had to take the batteries and mix 1400 gravity acid, make it down to 1215, so that we could fill our batteries. Our batteries were dry, and we had to fill the things, so we had to make our own electrolyte that went in them. So we got the thing pretty well working, and then we had the thing went on the line, so it was the communications were working down the highway. So then we were coming out. This was probably just prior to the Decoration Day, about a week or so before that. We went to Watson Lake
Watson Lake is,
in Yukon.
what direction did you go to get
North. We went north on the highway to catch the airplane. We got the airstrip. We drove the entire 92 miles from Coal River to Watson Lake without any brakes on our vehicle, which was a weapons carrier, which is a four-wheel drive Dodge vehicle, a little bit large, about the size of a good-sized pickup truck.
Like a 1 ton?
Yeah, half three-quarter ton truck. And we had dropped into a hole that had some mud hole, and we'd sheared our hydraulic line so that we had no brakes for 92 miles. We were supposed to be 92 miles normally would take you probably 4 or 5 hours maybe. We started out at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was 10 o'clock at night before we got there. Due to being stuck in mud holes and having to creep up the mountain so that we wasn't going too fast when we got up there because of no brakes.
You had to go down and
Then we'd have to shift down in low gear to go down, just crawl. So after all that time of about 17 hours, we made the 92 miles, so we didn't make very good average.
5 miles an hour, a little above.
And we had to be pulled out of any number of mud holes along the way, and going in our 92 miles. We caught the plane back to Edmonton, and was probably in Edmonton less than 36 hours, and was on our way back home.
Do you have any recollection of how much you got paid for doing that?
Yes, my salary was 10% over my base. At that time, I think my base was around $1.03 an hour. I got 10% more for that, and then we had overtime, which you got an additional time and a half for overtime. So we were running about 40, 50, about $70, $75 a week plus your room and board, of course, for this.
Of course, they paid for your room and board,
Yes,
transportation.
we did get pretty good meals. I can't complain on the meals.
Well, yeah, where did food come from? Who cooked it? And
Morris and Knudsen, they had professional cooks that did their cooking and run the mess halls.
Morrison Knudsen was the
Contractor for the putting up the poles and the string and the wire, and they also were responsible for putting up the buildings. And the Signal Corps was responsible for keeping the road open and things like this. So I got back then about, I guess, a week before Decoration Day in May, in 1943.